Here?
Yeah.
Good point. Good point. If this is an underground thing. How could the Germans do that? How could they move so much stuff to the South Pole? Simple logistics. I mean, I have this question again. How can you do that if you are the Kriegsmarine chief of operations? It was so hard for Admiral Byrd to go there in the 20s and 30s, until a friend of mine told me, who is a U-boat buff, Henry Stevens from the German Research Project, one of the persons that has helped me tremendously in my research. He discovered that there were German transport submarines that could hold 5,000 tons, that were 5,000 deadweight tons, which is about 2.5 times as much as the standard Allied Liberty class transport ships. The Germans had 2.5 times bigger submarines than the Allies were building surface ships. These submarines were so huge they could carry bulk cargo, they could carry personnel, they could carry armaments, anything. They were building them in sections on assembly lines in several dry docks at incredible speed. And from 42 on, about 100 submarines were allocated for, I mean, quite a sizable number of submarines were allocated for service in the South Pacific, basically the South Polar colony. Admiral Dönitz and the SS Elite decided to start building the last bastion after the fortifications that they were building in the Alps, preparing for a last stand in 44 and 45. They obviously had one more line of defense, which was their South Polar colony. After the war ended, it became clear that about 100 of these submarines mysteriously disappeared. They were never scuttled, bombed, torpedoed, or surrendered by their crews. They just disappeared into thin air, a whole fleet of 100 submarines. Some of them resurfaced with skeleton crews of about a dozen men in Argentina after they departed from Kiel and with fully loaded with hundreds of people on board. And little by little the story emerged that the Germans have been cooking something big on the South Pole. The biggest breakthrough came for me when I discovered the secret. This was the magical key to the German South Polar Kingdom. This is a submarine propulsion drive made by Walter, engineer Walter, was the same inventor who built the Walter rocket engine for the Messerschmitt 163 rocket plane, the Comet. And the same engine was also used for the Schriever rocket-propelled saucer that probably flew at 4,000 kilometers an hour, 4 times the speed of sound. Admiral Reichsmarshal of Aviation Göring is rumored to have climbed and flown one of these saucers. So what Walter discovered was a typical German engineering genius. He made an underwater rocket. He basically made the submarine to carry its oxidizer on board as the rocket carries its oxidizer on board. It had the usual tanks of diesel fuel and another tank for the oxidizer called Ingolin, in the name of his son, Ingo, or whatever his name was, which was hydrogen peroxide. Simple hydrogen peroxide that they were using for the drive for the fuel pumps for the V-2 rocket, or as the fuel of the Walter rocket engine for the Messerschmitt Comet rocket plane. And there would be a fuel pump similar to the one in the V2 rocket engine, fuel pump that would pump the fuel and the oxidizer into the reaction chamber, into the burning chamber. The oxidizer will, through these regulating valves, this is a triplex pump, a three-flow pump. The oxidizer will come to the reaction chamber and through a catalyst, I don't know, I forgot what was the catalyst for hydrogen peroxide, but silver or some simple substance, would decompose it explosively into, very energetically into hydrogen and oxygen. We have a ready-made fuel and oxidizer. And they would be sprayed into the burning chamber together with the fuel. We have a spark plug. The mixture would ignite and drive a standard gas turbine. There was a smaller gas turbine for the reverse, direct drive shaft. Actually, probably with some reductor because that's too much RPMs for the poor propeller. But then, another genius invention here. Then the exhaust gases would be condensed to a liquid phase, cooled and condensed in a condenser using cheap, free cold water from the ocean. And the remaining residue, some of it would be pumped back into the fuel pump for reuse. And the rest, the condenser water, this was a separator that would separate the useful phase from the used ones. And this that was not needed would be pumped in a liquid phase behind the submarine, thus eliminating even the air bubbles behind it, the gas wave, the bubbles behind the submarine, which gave the Germans unlimited key to the world oceans. This is basically a nuclear-powered submarine. In a 5,000-ton submarine, you have enough space for the fuel tanks to circle the globe. If you can't make one full circle, they have milk cows, the milking cows, the submarine tenders for other submarines. They would dock somewhere. I don't know whether they could do underwater docking and transfer of fuel, but if they could do that, which is no big deal after all, they would have been really invincible. So they could depart from Kiel, getting out from their underwater pen entries to their underground submarine pen, travel the whole ocean without resurfacing to breathe oxygen, maybe few quick resurfacing for navigation if they did not have good inertial compasses. They would go under the ice sheet of the South Pole, which is the biggest hurdle, and this has been one of the biggest problems with all other expeditions, and enter into the underwater entries of their underground submarine pens and then resurface inside, where it's warm, never freezes, and they could be drinking their coffee all throughout the cruise without any interference by enemy planes or submarine chasing ships. This is the key to the South Polar Colony, the German South Polar Colony. With these giant 5,000-ton transport submarines, they could move any number of material and people with impunity. We have not to forget that the tachyon drives that they were using for the flying saucers, basically the color converter, could provide unlimited electric energy to their submarines. So that is another system, even more advanced than this one, because this one still needs the hydrogen peroxide and the diesel fuel as fuel. The other ones were free energy submarines that could circle forever. They were more advanced than even the nuclear submarines of the present day. But the Americans and the Russians tried in the mid-50s with great difficulty to build such a hydrogen peroxide submarine, the Balto cycle submarine. They each built one and abandoned them because the nuclear-powered submarines were already coming in service. Almost 15 years after the Germans successfully tried that. They had about a dozen submarines of different models that were running on the Balto principle, something that has been very little talked about. late into the 60s and 70s, unmanned